gathered here today to get through this thing called life. Electric word, life, it means forever, and that's a mighty long time. But I'm here to tell you, there's something else.
Good afternoon. I know that's not all for me. I know you're tired, you're ready to go home, but thank you for spending the time here at NC SexCon. This has been an awesome experience, so give yourselves a hand. And also give a hand to Tanya Bass and if you were a part of this team, please just stand up and be recognized. Thank you so much. So, let's get right into it. But first, we have to make sure that you have taken your selfies, you have taken your pictures, and now we need to know where to put them, right? So, these are the approved these are the approved hashtags for this presentation. And if you're committed to coming here next year, not necessarily this place, but wherever we have this, please make some noise and let Tanya know that you really appreciate what she's been doing. All right, so now that you have the hashtags, this is where you can send them. Tanya introduced me earlier from my professional title. I am off work right now, so don't judge me. One last thing, I'd like to let you know, since I'm not in that hat right now, I am in this hat. I am a contextologist. That means I get to put things in context appropriately. So keep that in mind as we go through our presentation. So, anybody know why we're here? You can talk back to me. Yeah, we're talking about sex. Yeah. So, let's put it in context. So, I'm going to be using themes and images and quotes from the movie The Color Purple, right? Has anybody seen the movie? Anybody read the book? Anybody seen the play? Ah, we got some triple doubles in here. Good stuff. So the movie is what I'm going to be using. And we're also going to pair it with different musical references that are appropriate to the context of what we're using these images and these quotes from. So, as you know, the movie The Color Purple was filmed in North Carolina. It was in Anson and Union counties. Uh-oh, got somebody? Got a witness. And so it was an adaptation of the book by Alice Walker, which won a Pulitzer Prize. Now, there was some controversy when the movie came out. It didn't win any awards, but it's a very cult classic in a sense. And so the main themes that come out of the movie are themes around domestic violence, sexual violence, pedophilia, incest, sexism, racism, all types of isms, right? Poverty. And we talk about these things and we talk about some of these things in the lens of what we call social determinants of health, right? But we'll get to that. We'll get to that. So when we talk about the history that is surrounded in this movie, we can't talk about it without talking about slavery. So we'll definitely that'll be a constant theme. So in terms of when the movie was presented in the timeline, it was in Georgia, and through the time lens of 1909 to 1937 is the main plot. But when we talk about the things that come out of this movie, we're talking about things that have still hurt us even to this day. We're talking about how people use other human beings as labor force, as anything they wanted to do. And in part of that, in keeping in context with this conference, sex was used as a weapon. Gosh, can you just imagine what people went through? We complain about it's 95 degrees outside. But we're talking about people who were living in that heat with no air conditioning to go back to, and still being brutalized, victimized, and just all types of unspeakable atrocities. And so I hope you can bear with me as we talk about this in a good context. Not good in terms of this was a good thing. No, good as in we can learn from this and have some creative conversations, some courageous conversations around this to end some of the suffering that people are facing. And because slavery has not ended. It may have changed color for some people, but it still goes on. And that's slavery that's either physical or mental, emotional. So we'll talk about that. But when we talk about sex as a weapon, in America, slavery, it was so bad. When we think about it, we had people who were breeding of Africans that were in America, right? I mean, it just, when I think about it, I mean, it breaks my heart. I'm trying to keep it all together right here because I couldn't have gone through it. So let me get into this. Some of the bad things that come out of slavery was that, to put it lightly, people have compared it to the world's longest internship that was unpaid, basically. And then when people wanted to get paid for the services that they were, doing, providing, then it was a problem. So when we talk about sex as a weapon, we're talking about people who were bred. And there's a term that comes out of slavery that most people don't even think about. The term MFer comes out of slavery, comes out of breeding people. And what would happen is they would breed slaves to continue the labor force, this unpaid labor. And they would put bags on the heads of the people they wanted to breed, a male and a female. And a lot of times, a son and a mother would be breeding and not even know it. It's crazy. But this is all about the power and control dynamics. So we talk about power and control. We talk about a system that people use to control people, to dominate them, to keep them in their place, right? There's a scene in part of the movie early on where Celie's dad tells her, right after she's given birth to the son that they had, you better not tell nobody but God. That's a way of having that power and control dynamic manifested into the way we live. So we think about another scene later on in the movie where she's looking for mail from her sister, and he yokes her up and says, you better not touch that mailbox. I know if it's been tampered with. So you're seeing these themes of power, control dynamic going manifesting through this whole story. And we're not even pulling it together. We talk about certain themes or quotes in the movie in a hysterical context of you told Harpo to beat me, or Harpo who that woman is, and we say all of that. And it's good to find some humor in some things because we suffered so long. But when we really think about this power control dynamic, it really permeates everything that we do. It builds up these cycles of failure that have not been deconstructed yet. We were only seen as 3/5 of a person. So when we talk about the context around all lives matter, it doesn't start last year or a year before or a couple of years ago. It starts back in 1776, where we hold these truths to be self-evident that all men are created equal, unless you're black, unless you're poor. Because what we're talking about here is that didn't apply to us, unless you're a woman. Because we weren't seen as people. We were seen as 3/5 of a person. But better yet, we were seen as property. So let me take a little detour. Raise your hand if you ever heard of the Holocaust. Right. So there's a new field called epigenetics, right? And I say it's new because it's new to me. But it is new, it's newer. In terms of research goes, it's a newer phenomenon of looking at things in a different lens that looks at epidemiology and the genetic codes and all this. So Holocaust survivors, right? We can say that Holocaust was between 4 years, 12 years. It's a different argument depending on where the people are coming from. But we're looking at Holocaust survivors, right? And they've gone through this trauma. And what has happened is that they have created some imbalances in the body due to the trauma, the sustained trauma. And so they have altered stress hormones, right? Due to this trauma that gets passed on to their offspring. So what are we talking about here? We're talking about a thing called cortisol, right? So cortisol is released in the body when you're dealing with trauma. And so these Holocaust survivors are using up all their cortisol. But the enzyme that breaks down the cortisol is in lower amounts. So they're not able to break down all the cortisol because they've had sustained periods of trauma. Usually cortisol helps you survive. If you're starving, it'll help you stay alive. But when it's present in the body for such a long period, then it alters not only you, but if you tend to have offspring, it'll alter them. So the offspring are born with high levels of cortisol and even lower levels of the enzyme that breaks down cortisol. What does that do to them? The body will soak up the cortisol instead of breaking it down. And then they will be predisposed to certain health issues. Diabetes, hypertension, obesity. So if we see that in Holocaust survivors, what do you think happens when we're dealing with the American Holocaust that we call slavery in this country? And you see the results. If you've ever heard of health disparities, if you ever heard of health inequities, then you're seeing the direct result of historic trauma in a group of people and their offspring. So it leads us to a discussion of Dr. Joy DeGruy's theory around post-traumatic slave syndrome. And so what she does is talk about this thing called the MAP. The M stands for the multi-generational trauma with continued oppression. The A stands for the absence of opportunities to heal or have access to available benefits in society. And all this leads to the P, which is post-traumatic slave syndrome. So we're looking at slavery. We're looking at the results genetically and through epidemiology of what's happening. So then we also go back to that conversation of we're not considered a people, we're a person. So And this is a quote from a friend of mine, Dr. Kenneth Hammond Perry, who says the conversation of consent in the US is really a legal construct. When you have a group of people that were viewed as property and not as human beings, then you gain a better perspective of how sexual violence has been perpetuated during slavery and beyond, because in our laws and larger culture, there is no recognition of a black or woman's right to consent. Let that marinate just for a second. So what we're really talking about is the issues of consent. If you're not seen as a person, you're seen as property, then what's going on is there's no legal standing to say that you got raped or that you didn't give consent, because if you're not seen as a person, then you don't have the rights of a person. So what are you? You're property, right? This is my property. I can do whatever I want with my property. In the law, that's not going to charge me. It's not going to pull up a suit. It's not going to sue me. It's not going to bring charges to say he did this to me, he violated me. It's property. So when human beings are seen as property, we got a problem. Here's part of that problem. We can go from the Stanford case, we can go to Nate Parker, we can go to the high school basketball player. What we're seeing are inequities in the system because it's due to the lack of understanding of consent or the lack of caring of a person's consent if you're especially a woman. And God help you if you're a black woman or a person of color. Then the value of your life is even lower. These are the conversations that we need to have with our young men and women. We gotta change the culture. We gotta change the narrative. Unchecked people go unchecked every time. Because this is the problem. We are raising people up in a culture of what? Not to get raped. Instead of don't rape. I was scared to death in college when I would have young ladies come by the room. I mean, I was scared to death. I didn't want to catch any charges. So I limited my interactions with those females in that way and made sure we were at that point and we both understood. I have never had a drop of alcohol in my life, nor did I provide any women with alcohol in my life before I got married. So that means point of clarity. I've never seen my wife drunk. And she babysits drinks, so we good. But what we're seeing here, and this is not uncommon. These cases, if you live in a college world or just a world of being young, you've seen these things happen. You've seen people be taken advantage of. Some people think that's a cool thing. I never thought that. I thought you were a weak person if you had to get somebody drunk to have your way with them. I still think that. Oh. And it hits home because I have a daughter who's 5 years old and I have to protect her against this culture. I was scared to death of having a child because I knew I was going to have a daughter. Seriously, everybody else in my family had boys. And I won the science, well, I got second or third place in the science fair in 7th grade doing a study on probability. So I, in my social science mind, did the probability and said, guess what? You's gonna have a girl. And she's gotta fight against all these things. And I don't want you to think that it's just because she's a female. Because little boys have these issues too. And if we don't talk about these things, how will we ever combat the issues that are connected to them? Oh, let me tell you, just so we can get out here on time, I'm not gonna take any questions at the end, but you can text them or you can put them on social media and ask any question you want, so you can put them up now. And I am not a sexologist, so I will consult the team if there are questions I don't have the answer to.
All's my life I has to fight. All's my life I has to fight. All's my life I has to fight. All's my life I has to fight.
Your uncle. The one that's dressed in Bill Cosby sweaters, cologne, it smells like them Newports that stale. And I can tell he's had one too many, glass never empty, the drink too strong, the hug too long, known all alone that he's a pedophile, and him like himself a child, and child grandma likes the sweet family secrets under the rug. Go give your uncle a hug, obeying nanny. See there, honey, he has your favorite candy, passes out dollar bills, pops a fill, and he makes sure that you feel what's in his pants. Eyes dance as he flashes toothpick and gold tooth. He has this eerie relationship with our family youth, but here's the truth. We would rather disown a family member that's gay than say that there's a pervert that shares your DNA. You ever ask that child how they got that way? Now hold up, you going too far. That's your mother's brother, and damn, she really loves him, but it's starting to make sense when grandma hints that the kids that play with you can never stay with you overnight, because in the middle of the night, he gets off couches and stands in bedroom doors waiting for innocents to say their prayers and fall asleep. You see, wolves like to prey on sheep, and grandma's praying that secrets y'all keep quiet, cause quiet as it's kept. She has buried memories that she herself never wanted to give up, holds head up and would rather take them to her grave in order to save face, cause after all, what would them nosy town neighbors say? Feeling part responsible because she gave birth to him, would take up for him, stand up for him, cause him be her baby, and baby, he's just playing with you, wants to tickle you, and face turns as red as Elmo, because you know that slip up when his hand went up there, that was not an oops. And oops, grandma usually turns blind eye, but this time she caught this with her side eye, grabbed me from his lap, face slapped as she rolls her eyes, and tears roll down my eyes, and I just don't want to stay at grandma's house no more, cause she knows more than what she's telling, and I am telling you that Uncle favors Grandpa an awful lot. You see, a lot of family curses resurface, and we must break that cycle of family pedophiles, because when no one was looking, we forgot to protect your child. Therefore, that paperwork was never found. But it stops here. No, dear, you ain't gotta hug your damn uncle.
Let's give it up again for Trina Thoughts. I just want to let you know, this is a hard presentation. Like, it's very emotional. So when we talk about the inequities that we see in sexual health, just sexual lifestyles, just being a person, we see it every day. We see it in how people want to classify who we are because of what they think we are or who they want us to be, and not who we really are. Who are we? How are we defined by our culture or our sexuality? How do we define ourselves? How do we define others? What leads to these definitions? What is the measuring stick? What is the evidence-based strategies that we hide behind to classify people? Don't get so caught up in evidence-based strategies, because they don't always work for us. No, you writing a grant, it's perfect. Just like when we talk about community, we talk about a surface level scratch of what we think community is that we could write for a grant and get funded. Woo! But if you've never gone into a community and felt a little bit uncomfortable, you're not in true community. So this brings us to Prince. Have you ever noticed that, this is Prince's symbol, of course. You ever notice how it looks so much like some of the things you see on this genderbread person? There was an ambiguity, I can't even speak today, that Prince had. He had a complex relationship with black masculinity. If I could be so bold, Prince didn't give a damn. Prince was the original honey badger. Do you understand how Prince got his start? Prince was a black man wearing high heels with good hair, with eyeliner and lipstick, opening up for Mick Jagger. And they would boo him. They would throw things at him. They would throw fruit at Prince. Now, it's kind of hard to imagine that Prince that we talk about, that Prince who gives us all these hits, that Prince who probably was playing when some of us were conceived. That Prince. The man had hits. The man still has hits. The man opened the door for us to really express ourselves. When we talk about sexual expression or identity expression or gender identity and all that, we need to look at Prince, because he was just that, a prince in the cause of everything that we hold dear in terms of identity and how we express ourselves. You know, he promoted a freedom of expression, and it was a gender fluidity about what Prince did. People wanted to know, is he gay? Is he a whore? Is he somewhere in between? Is he androgynous? Oh, yeah, he was androgynous. Because he felt like he could do whatever he wanted, because that's who he was. So when Prince started to get some exposure, he really set apart what we consider gender roles. He did not care. And his influences on popular culture, on 80s culture, are undoubtedly so significant in terms of how we view the things that we view and hold dear, especially from that time period and beyond. This man is a sexual health god. He would blur the lines of gender and sexuality to a point where you would look past that. You know, you had a problem with this, you had a problem with that. When Prince came on, you didn't care. You were just like, oh, that's my jam, that's Prince. But we don't have that same type of conversation when it's in our own community. We want to villainize people for being who they are. We don't want to talk about those issues that have led some people to be confused. We don't want to talk about those issues that have led people to be vulnerable. We don't want to talk about those thieves in the temple that want to steal innocence. See what I did right there? That was for Bobby. We don't want to talk about those things because guess what? We have to look in the mirror and see ourselves, not always for who we are, but who we are not. We have failed children, we have failed parents, we have failed ancestors because we don't want to talk about the things that are important to talk about and get through. And this is not just a conversation about sexuality, it's also a conversation about racism. Racism is more than just understanding bigotry, discrimination, or bias. When we talk about racism, we're talking about power, control. We're talking about that unshared power and control that one group has over other groups, that influence. And the same thing holds dear and true to what we're talking about. So when we talk about 80s culture, we talk about even a few years before, we're talking about a sexual revolution that happened in America. I mean, you can really think about how you grew up. Some of us grew up knowing that there was just certain things you didn't see on TV, right? My mom, God bless her soul, said when she was growing up, you couldn't see a woman in her bra on TV. Now, after a certain time in the day, guess what? You see it all. And that's on the regular network TV stations. But you know, we also have to talk about the sexual hookup culture. Now, we always like to point to the people who were born in a certain age that we like to call hippies, right? And blame it on them. Oh, the flower children and all those people just expressing themselves and just giving it to everybody. Well, those people had kids, and they had kids, and some of us are those kids. And if you're honest with yourself, you may have gone to college, you may have been a part of hookup culture, you may have done some things you're not proud of, but now you say you have been delivered. But you know, we all have those things that are done in secret places, those things that are done after a party.
Then it's probably Chris, and after the club it went down like this. Alexis, Aisha, Denise, Shamika. They went partying for the night, not quite looking for Mr. Right, but having fun with Mr. Right now. And anyhow, this is how these girls get down with skirts as short as their attention span. As the number of men they slept with started to expand. You see, they're the life of the party, just trying to fit in with everybody, from drinking and smoking and sniffing and joking and laughing and excuse me, choking because red eyes couldn't see past their clouded vision. Never envisioned that this would be the night that's gonna change their life. See, when you live life in the fast lane, fast cars driving fast lane, so the car was pushed in overdrive for sex, popping and X, doing lines came next, complimented with Henny and Coke. We taking life for a joke, baby. We popping bottles, but what more to expect if Superhead is your role model? Using the wrong Superhead to get ahead, so they lived it up, so quick to give it up. Eyes fixated and decisions now faded because they have no idea where this new high would take them until they met him. His name, Harold Ivan Vanderbilt. And let me tell you, girls, he was so nicely built and well grown with swagger, and they had to have him as soon as he walked through the door. Eyes flirted from across the dance floor. Walking over, he asked, haven't we met somewhere before? He said, nah, baby, I'm counting you in town, but I see you and your girls like to get around, and I can tell. I'm quite sure we get to know each other quite well, so do tell, because I can tell you ladies have quite a reputation for having a good time, and I can't choose this one, because, hell, all y'all fine, and I just can't wait to make all y'all mine, so won't you come go with me? It's only 3:15, and they said, what you say your name was again? He said, call me by my initials. I'm Mr. H.I.V. See, after the show, it's the after party. After the party, it's the hotel lobby. After the bell, then it's probably Chris. Come on, y'all. We gotta be more responsible than this.
You feeling this so far? Don't sound like it. Are you feeling it? So, this is, if you know me, I'm always working, and my mind's always twisting, it's always turning. I'm always learning. No, I wasn't trying to do poetry. I was sitting, so Tanya asked me to do this months ago. 10 minutes? I got here later. All right, I'll speed it up. Thank you, Ms. Botiford. So, Tanya asked me to do this months ago, right? And so I would wake up, and I should have brought it out here. I had this, did you pick up my phone? Appreciate it. I didn't mean to throw it at you. I have this purple. Purple's my favorite color, so that's why I got this on. But as a big man, I can't wear purple because I look like Grimace, and it's not a visual you want to see. I don't even want to see it. But I was in church, and one of my skill sets is I'm a church musician. So sometimes I would take my little purple notebook with me and jot down some ideas. So we have a young minister at the church who plays the organ. He's, I think, like an artist resident at Duke, and he's good guy. He's from Chicago. But he was preaching, and this came out of his mouth. What happens when the oppressor changes the identity of the oppressed? Wow. So immediately I'm thinking about, I'm about to put this in my presentation. But it's not so far-fetched when we think about the way we try to classify people. You're gay, you're straight, you're queer, you're whatever. Oh, and then we want to use biologics to kind of define our stance or position and say, oh, well, you're born with this, so that's who you are. So you can't go into certain... I didn't say it, you did. You can't do this. Oh, you put that down, you're a boy. Boys don't play with that. Oh, you put that down, you're a girl. Girls don't do that. So we're already starting at a young age, or people who are impressionable minds, to tell them who they are and who they are not. Are we oppressing our people, our children, our family, our friends, our communities? Are we adding an extra layer? Are we telling Kunta that his name is Toby? Yes. So, when we're talking about identity, we're talking about some things that we really need to think about. So we all know Miss Seeley, right? We know this quote. I'm not even gonna read it. You can read it. But you know what comes out of this? And I wrote this in church too. Miss Seeley was a victim of her own stolen self-worth. She never lived in a world that told her that her black is beautiful, that her life mattered. You see that throughout the movie, throughout the themes of, oh, you know, you're ugly. You sure is ugly. If you live with that every day, every minute, every hour of your life, with somebody telling you you're not pretty, you're dark, you're ugly, you're this, you're that, and then on top of that, abuse you continuously. And these are the people who, in the hierarchy of your life, you are supposed to look up to for protection and guidance. Then why would you not even think that it was true? What shaped her identity? Her relationships. Good and bad. Her relationships with men were abusive. They were controlling. They were manipulative. Her relationships with women, her sister, Suge, at a point, was love, caring, acceptance. It's beautiful. So we have to be so careful about what we do. Yo, I told my wife that was gonna work. I told her, I said, she was like, why aren't you playing the whole thing? I said, because the people are gonna sing it. Give yourself a hand, please. So, when we think about this scene, and if you really read the book, you gonna try me again? I'm speeding up. I'm almost done, baby. It's okay. So, when we talk about the book, when we talk about this scene, the book is actually way deeper. Man, when I saw this as a child, I was like, oh, okay, that was cute. Man, when you read that book or even see the play, you want to talk about identity and expression and exploration? She went hard in the paint. But her life experiences never really allowed her to explore her sexuality. She was so confined. And you know, we see this when we make people be in a box. The best time you see this is when kids go to college. You can tell who's been sheltered and who has not. And just think about your college experiences or, you know, your life experiences, and you'll know what I'm talking about. But when she finally has a sense of freedom, then she blossoms into a beautiful person. And beauty is not just the aesthetics. Beauty is measured by who you are, how you treat people, how you connect with people. I've been photobombing people all day, right? Because that's who I am. But I want that love that I have for each and every one of you to shine through, not by just my talk game, but my actions. Now, we could disagree. We don't have to agree with everything, but guess what I'm going to do? I'm going to love you because that's what I was taught to do. That's how I was raised. And we can diffuse issues because we can talk in a space that we don't always have to agree, but when we connect, it's a beautiful thing. I can leave 5605 Six Forks Road every day and know that I'm going to sleep like a baby. But we tend to forget those people who don't have that opportunity, those people who don't have that freedom, that way to express themselves. So, as we start to talk about equity in the sense and the lens of the things that we need to talk about, we talk about sexual health equity. So, how many of y'all knew that there was no definition for sexual health equity? Well, I created one. And this is it. And anybody want to ask me when I created it or where I created it? Bingo! Yahtzee! Past Sunday, I said, Tanya, there is not a definition. Bobby, there is not a definition of sexual health equity. So here's what I came up with. What do y'all think of this definition? So, when we're talking about sexual health equity, we also have to talk about policy. So I have a master's in public administration, so that's my area. My subject matter expertise even goes beyond what was in the bio, it goes to policy. And I was reading some papers as I was preparing for this. And there was one thing that struck me that said education policies which provide accurate, and here goes our word, evidence-based and appropriate sexual health information and counseling will go a long way in reducing barriers, stigma, and discrimination, right? Because we have to look at what influences sexual health. Sexual behavior and attitudes, cultural and societal factors, biological risks, and gender predisposition, and mental and physical illness. But we can't talk about sexual health equity unless we talk about, GPS. Health equity. So health equity is defined in many ways, but in our office, this is how we define health equity, right? The ability or the opportunity for people to have the highest and optimal health and well-being, or the opportunity to have it, right? Health inequities are those things that are barriers to that, which we define as health equity, and a little bit more. And health disparities is the gap, the measurable distance that we look at from one group to another group. And what is the one group we always compare everybody else to? Say it loud. White people, right? So if we're running a track, if we're looking at this in the lens of we're running a track, we're running a race. Everybody knows what a race is, right? Usain Bolt, right? We're running the track. So health equity is that goal, that ticker tape that we want to run across. That's where we're trying to get to. Health inequities are described as those barriers that not everybody faces, because we got a group of people that have started first and they're in the inside lane, because we're running around the whole track at least once, right? They're in that inside lane, that good position, and they don't have any hurdles that they got to jump. But everybody else who started after them have hurdles that they got to jump through. Those barriers are health inequities. And when we really talk about that measurable distance from where the people who started earlier than everybody else that didn't have to jump through any hurdles and everybody else, those are the disparities. Everybody got that? No more science for me? So, no, I'm gonna wrap it up. So, when we talk about, and I'll go through this pretty quickly. When we talk about equality, because a lot of us want to talk about equality, but we don't want to put it in context. Everybody say context. We don't want to put it in context, and I'm a contextologist. So there's a difference between equality and equity. Equity is really about meeting people where they are. Equality is about giving everybody the same thing. Raise your hand if you need $50. See, not everybody's hand is up. But if I gave everybody, I'm not giving everybody $50. But if I gave everybody $50, that's equality. Now, there's some people who did not raise their hand. So if I only gave the money to the people who raise their hands and that really demonstrate the need, then that is equity. And that's the lens that we have to get to before we can talk about equality. And then we also talk about social determinants of health. But there's also a thing called social determinants of sexual health. I will not jump into that. But when we talk about social determinants, we're talking about those things that are connected to where we are and how we got there, and then how we perform after that. So if we're talking about education, we're talking about transportation, we're talking about what are these issues that are connected to what we do or cannot do or not have access or opportunity to. That is what we're talking about when we're talking about social determinants of health. All right, so my wife told me again, she said, you gotta do the hand movements. I said, no, they're gonna do it. So thank you for proving me right twice today. All right, so this is an interesting, I know you're like, what are you talking about? So there's a part in this movie where Celie's dad, who was this vile person, he finally dies. Just die. And so she asks his bride, how did he die? And she said, on top of me. So I know you're like, how does this connect to what we're talking about? Well, I wanted to use this space to talk about the abuse of sexual enhancement drugs. A lot of us don't know, but Miss Trina Thoughts she is an amazing person. And she created this Health Disparities poetry CD a long time ago. And she brought to light something in her work that I did not know about. And she's got a poem that talks about older people still doing it.
Yes, we are.
Yep, there we go. Thank you. And it's beautiful. But you never want to talk about your older people. You never want to have that visual. Okay, so let me just, I'm just gonna be over my time. Is that okay? Just a few more seconds? So, I was a child and walked in on my parents. They were fully covered. And they did not stop. I would have been traumatized. I was going to get my lunch money. Back then lunch was $1. So my mom just reached over and gave what she thought was $1. It was 20. So I was killing, I was making it rain. So I internalized that's supposed to be hush money. But no, what's going on though is we have people that are abusing sexual drugs and supplements. So there's a thing called sextasy. Anybody ever heard of that? I'm not talking about those Cinemax shows that come on late at night. This is the combination of Viagra and ecstasy. And people are dying. So that's why this makes this slide appropriate. Because it's something that we have to think about when we're looking at the total picture of sexual health. Now, we got some men in here and some women that probably will relate, but especially my black men, you gotta raise your hand, because I don't want to bring light to this, not that many of us in here, but you can nod your head if you've ever been in a barbershop and somebody had them pills. They was slinging that Viagra on the low. Oh, y'all don't know about that? I'm sorry, women. Some older men do hustle hard on the side, literally. I ain't messing with you. All right, let's get this over with, because I know she's gonna give me another sign. I know I stopped it right before the good part. Oh, speak, Lord, speak to me. So I know you're wondering why that slide is in there, right? Well, when we think about our communities, and I'm talking about the Black community and communities of color specifically, we're talking about the messages around sexual health. We're talking about sexual health equity, right? We have not done our due diligence to our people, our communities, because we don't want to talk about sexual health. We're quick to turn to certain scriptures and lean to our own understanding behind, oh, he got swallowed up because he was doing that. And if you really look at a scholar or a theologian, that's not what the problem was. Just because the man was pleasuring himself doesn't mean that's why it was the reason he got swallowed up. In the Old Testament, that man was supposed to produce an heir for his widowed sister-in-law. And he was disobedient. And that's why he got swallowed up. Not because he spilled his seed. But people don't want to talk about that. You never hear about that in Bible study, do you? Yeah, they left that one out. Well, let me give you a scripture. I'm not a preacher. I just know I'm a church musician, so I sit near the preacher so I can sometimes see his notes. Hosea 4:6 says that our people are utterly destroyed due to what? Lack of knowledge. And if we're not sharing the knowledge about sexual health, we are doing ourselves a disservice. We have blood on our hands. We are murdering our people because we are not extending that awareness to sexual health matters in our community. So guess what happens? People lean to their own understanding. They don't talk about it. They get stuck, shiftless, tired, and we die. I say enough is enough. We have to talk about these issues. We have to make sure that we're doing our due diligence to break these cycles of failure, to make sure that we're making a better place for the people who are around us, who come after us, who are, these impressionable minds. There's a quote that is actually my favorite quote in the movie, where Mr.'s dad says, "Well, the dead has arisen." I often use this quote to talk about people who are late to church, people I haven't seen in a while. When Bobby comes to my office and she's been missing for like 2 months. When Tanya finally calls me back. When Demetrius comes and, he got his pastor's plate. Somebody I haven't seen in a while. This is kind of how I greet them and say, well, the dead has arisen. But in this context, say context. Oh, y'all getting tired on me now. Okay, I'm almost done. In this context, we're talking about rising above our situations, rising above those things that have been holding us down, and making sure that we are standing up at the table so we can be heard. Making sure that we're spreading the message that is sexual health equity, that is sexual expression, that is the things that we want to make sure that we are passing on in a positive manner, that break these cycles of failure, that build up strength, that build up communication, that build community. We have to make sure that we rise above those circumstances and situations and don't let them hold us back. So I will leave you on this. We all have a part to play in this. We all have things that we can do. So I have opened up my heart, my resources to make sure that the cause that you all fight for every day as sexual health educators and sex educators and sexologists, or whatever you want to call yourself, or people who are working with communities or helping to end health disparities, we are a resource. We are here to help, and we're here to think about innovative strategies to do this work. I thank you, and I really want to make sure that we connect beyond this conference. Thank you so much.